Hello and welcome to the first Gimp challenge. Gimp is an image editing software and it's available for download for free at gimp.org. You can follow along with the challenge or you can just watch the video and you'll see me use Gimp in some basic ways. The challenge that I'm going to give myself is to monsterize somebody. And there are a number of ways you can do this. You can create layers and apply them on top of a photo. You can use tools in Gimp to distort somebody's facial features. You can copy aspects of a person and repeat it, such as a useful third eye. First, I'll take you through the layout of the program. When you first open Gimp, you'll see these four major panels. On the top left, you have your tool panel. On the bottom left, you have your tool settings panel. If you double-click on a tool, you'll see the tool settings for each one of those tools pop up. On the top right, you have some nested panels. First, you have your brushes on the left, then patterns, then fonts, then recent images, then selection panel, then color history. Below that, you have layers, channels, and paths. Layers is what I'll be using today. In order to get started in the program, you can drag and drop a raster-based image into the program. Make sure it's a fairly high-quality image. I'm using a JPEG that is 72 dpi and is about 700 pixels high. So it makes for a decent image. It could be better, but it's still very serviceable. You can just do an eyeball check of your image by clicking on the zoom tool or using Z on your keyboard as a shortcut and just zoom in. If you get pretty close and it's not super pixelated, then you probably will be okay. I can quickly zoom back out by going to the View menu, finding my zoom, which is now at 400%, and fitting the image in the window to go back to normal size. Also, I'll be using this series of menus, which is exactly the same as the menu toolbar at the top of the screen. However, the image capture or the screen capture that I'm using for this video does not pick up my system toolbar, so you won't be able to see my menus. So I'll be using this one, which is a nice feature that Gimp provides. Okay, so now I'm going to start monsterizing Raleigh fingers. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to remove this bald head that is in soft focus and is in the foreground of the image. And I'm going to do that by using the free select tool. I'm going to select it, then I'm going to cut and paste it and make it its own layer. In order to use the free select tool, you click and drag to draw a selection. You can also release the mouse button and you can click and create these anchor points, which are editable later. Return to your original point that you started, click once, and you'll see that the selection is active. And you'll see these marching ants, which tells you the selection is active. If I hover back over, you'll see that these anchor points are now editable, and I can drag them and move them around to adjust the selection. Now I'm going to make this selection its own layer. In order to do that, I'll go to the Edit menu, and I will cut those pixels. If I go to my brush panel, you'll see that that head actually appears as a brush. Anything that's on the clipboard in Gimp becomes a brush, which is actually very handy. Now, to make it its own layer, I'll go back to the Edit menu, and I will paste. It returns to the same spot, but you'll see in the Layers panel now that I have a floating selection. Pasted layer. You may not be able to see this as it's at the bottom of the Layer panel, but at the bottom left, you'll see that the Create a New Layer icon is highlighted in green. In order to make this a new layer, I can't just leave it a floating selection. So if I hit Create New Layer, now that head is on its own pasted layer. And I can see that it is by turning off the visibility, and you can see that it disappears. I'm going to leave it turned off for now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a couple different tools to repair the area that was damaged when I removed those pixels just now. So I'm going to click in my main background image, and I'm going to zoom in a bit so that you can see. And okay. So first I'm going to repair the jacket, and I can do that pretty easily by using the clone stamp tool. Clone stamp tool allows you to create a stamp by selecting a target area. In order to define your target area, hold the command key and click once. You can see that that is a pretty small stamp because my brush is very small. So I'll want to bring the size up. Over in the tool settings, I can change the size. And I'll make it, let's try 65. Hit return. Oh, not 6500. 65. That's better. Hold command, click once, and I've defined that stamp. Now, when I click, I can also click and drag. You'll see that it's using the area that I defined in order to repeat that stamp. So I just did the darker part of the jacket. Now I'll sample the lighter part of the jacket. That's a little too light. I want somewhere a little darker. Now the edges of my stamp are too hard to do what I want, so I'll bring the hardness down. And now I have a soft edge stamp, and that's much better. Maybe undo that last one. There's some hard edges on the jacket, so I can use the smudge tool, bring the force down a bit, and just smudge that away. And it's not perfect, but it's still pretty convincing to look like fabric. Next I have the area of the shirt. And I could use the clone stamp tool for this. I'm making the brush smaller by hitting the left bracket key. Left bracket shrinks the brush and right bracket enlarges the brush. Let's try the clone stamp tool and see what happens. I'm going to make the hardness 100, define a source, and click once. Doesn't look great. I think a better way to do this would be to take my free select tool, draw the shape that I want to fill, hold Option, and that allows me to move that selection. Now I can move that selection to a blank area that is going to suit my needs. I want something with a little bit of shadow, but not too many folds. Now I'm going to Command C or Edit Copy to copy that selection. You can see that it appears in my brush menu. Let's use that brush feature that Gimp provides. So I'll hit my brush. I want to deselect, first of all. Oops, sorry. I want to go to Select, None, and remove that selection area. Now with my brush, I'm going to select that brush that I just created, and there it is. Boom. It's got a little bit of a hard edge on the right side, so I'll go back to my smudge tool, and I'll choose a softer edge brush, hit the left bracket key to make it a little bit softer, and I'll smudge it away. All right, so there I've repaired the jacket just using a couple of the tools. Go to View, and I will go back and fit in the full window. The next thing I want to do is I want to remove the background. I could use the free select tool, but there are a lot of complex shapes such as the hand and the hair, so drawing that free selection might be really tough. A better way to do this is to use the fuzzy select tool, which looks like a magic wand right next to the free select tool. The fuzzy select tool selects pixels based on their pixel color information. There are a lot of blues in the background, so it's going to be easy for the fuzzy select tool to select these blues, all as one big group. If I turn on my selection panel, it shows me this black and white overlay, and I can see what's selected and what's not. What I plan on doing is selecting the background and then inverting the selection so that I have the opposite. You can change the threshold over here. The threshold is what determines how narrow or how wide the fuzzy select tool sees the pixel information. You can see that at a low threshold, it really only selects a very, very small area because there's a lot of discrepancy between those pixels. If I change the threshold, if I made the threshold 100, it would probably select the entire image. So I'm going to go back to 23. And using my overlay here, I can tell what areas I have not selected yet. And I'm just doing a pretty general job, and then I'll clean it up later. All right, so that's pretty good right there. Now what I'm going to do is go to the Select menu, and I'm going to invert the selection. There's also a shortcut underneath the selection panel here. I'm going to invert the selection. You can see that now Raleigh Fingers is selected instead of the background. Now I'm going to edit cut, and it removes Raleigh Fingers. If I paste, as I did before, you'll see that it creates a floating selection. I'll create a new layer for it and paste. Now I can click on this background layer and I can discard it as I don't need it anymore. Now you'll see that I have just Raleigh Fingers, a transparent background. Transparent is determined, the transparency is shown by this checkered grid, and I have some bits of noise and debris from my the leftovers from my fuzzy select tool. So what I'll do here is just grab the eraser tool, and I will enlarge the brush size. I want the force at 100, I want the hardness at 100 so that I have a really clean edge, and I want the brush size to be 70. Now I have a big brush, and if I zoom in, Shift E is the shortcut for eraser, and I can go around and I can erase all this debris. I'm going to stop the video here as this is a bit time consuming. Okay, I've finished cleaning up the image, and while I was erasing the debris in the background, I decided that Raleigh Fingers is having a midlife crisis, and he missed out on what could have been his punk rock days because he was too focused on baseball. So I'm going to make him a midlife punk, and that's my monsterization. Not that I think that punks are monsters, I just think it's funny that Raleigh Fingers wants to be a punk. So I'm going to zoom out, and I use this zoom shortcut at the bottom of the screen, and like most image editing software, you'll find that there are multiple ways to navigate the space and multiple ways to perform functions. So I need to create a new background, and so I'm going to use this image of the legendary men's bathroom at CBGB's, the late CBGB's. A disgusting space, truly. Right now this layer is on top, and I can change that by just changing the layer order. I'm going to drag that layer below Raleigh Fingers. But I'd like to see the entire image. It's a horizontal image, and my canvas is vertical. So I'm going to do two things. Because this is my background image, I want this to be the edges of the canvas. I'm going to right-click the CBGB's layer, and I'm going to scale that layer. And you'll see this scale layer dialog box pop up, and we'll just make it a really easy size. Make sure that the maintain proportions icon is clicked. I'm just going to make it 800 by 600, super easy size. And that's the first step. And the second step is I need to change the canvas size. So I'm going to go to Image, Canvas Size, and I'm going to make the width 800, and I'm going to make the height 600. You'll notice that default, the proportion, maintain proportion is turned off for canvas size, which is much more helpful. And then I'm going to resize the canvas. All I have to do now is use the Move tool, which is this four-pointed arrow, or M, and I'm going to move the CBGB's background image into view. I'm going to now click on Raleigh Fingers, and I'm going to move him up, and he's a little bit too big for this current arrangement that I've got, so I'm going to right-click on his layer, and I'm going to scale him down a little bit. So I'm going to make sure that proportion is on, maintain proportions turned on, of course, and let's just bring the height down to 650, and now he's a little bit more sort of proportional to the space. Maybe I can just do that. I want his hand in view. Okay. Next, I need to change his appearance, and because he is now a middle-aged punk, I thought he would probably emulate somebody with a punk heritage, such as Johnny Rotten or John Lydon. So I'm going to steal John Lydon's haircut and give it to Raleigh Fingers. I dragged and dropped the John Lydon layer, and now I'm going to remove or select and remove the top of his head. And so I'm going to go back to my selection tools, and this time I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool, which is the top left-hand tool, and I'm just going to click and drag to grab that part of the image, and that should do it. Now I'm going to use the technique we've been using all along. I'm going to cut those pixels, and I'm going to paste them to create a floating layer, and create a new layer, and now just delete the background. Go back to my pasted layer and move it into roughly the position that it'll be in. Okay, now transforming this layer in order to fit Raleigh Fingers. There are a number of things I need to do. I need to scale it, I need to rotate it, and I need to remove the background. So the first thing is I'll use my fuzzy select tool, and because this is a pretty uniform color in the background, lots of reds and ochres, the fuzzy select tool at the threshold that I had before, 23, is pretty darn good. And actually that did a great job. So I'm just going to cut those pixels away. And select none. And then I'll zoom in. And the background's so busy I actually can't even really see that extra little noise that's over there, but I know it's there. So find my eraser tool and just clean that up a little bit. Okay. Zoom out a little bit. A little bit more. Okay. All right. On to the next two tasks. Rotating and scaling the top of Johnny Rotten's head. Um, it's going to be easier if I can see through this layer to the layer below. So what I'll do is drop the opacity by just lowering that a bit. And now I've got a semi-transparent Johnny Rotten, and I can now see the contours of Raleigh Fingers' head underneath. I'm going to scale, but instead of scaling by entering a value here, what I want to do is I want to scale visually. So I'm going to use the scale tool, and I'm going to just scale. And one of the things I like about Gimp is that it scales things proportionally automatically for you. You do not have to tell it to scale proportionally. Most software editing programs that I've used, you need to hold a key down in order to maintain proportions, but Gimp has you covered right away, and so there are some nice built-in default features that I found the workflow has really improved the workflow. Next, I need to rotate, and so I'm going to grab the rotate tool, which is right next to the scale tool, and I'm going to spin Johnny Rotten's head. If I move this target, that is going to shift my pivot point, so I can be a little bit more accurate if I want to by moving the pivot point. And then back to the move tool and move them into place. I can see that my scale is still a little bit off. Oops, that's rotate. I want the eyes and I want the ear to be about the same size so that I'm getting roughly the same proportions for both of their heads. And you can see that this center grid is on the scale tool allows you to move the selection around. So that looks pretty good. The angle of the heads are not exactly the same, but they're close enough that it's going to work for me. Okay, so let's return Johnny Rotten to normal opacity, back to 100, and now I can see the difference between the two layers, and I'm going to start blending and merging those layers together. So first thing I notice is that some of Raleigh Fingers' hair is sticking out behind his new haircut. So I'm going to select the Raleigh Fingers layer, click on the eraser tool, and then because I'm in that layer, I can now just go around and erase. Oop, I erased his ear. I didn't want to do that. I just want to erase the hair. I can go around and just erase behind the Johnny Rotten layer, and I'm not interfering with anything. Okay, so I've got a few adjustments to make to get these layers to blend together, and then I'll add some fun effects to them. So first, I need to do some erasing to the bottom of this top layer, bottom edge of the top layer, in order to make it less obvious. So I'm going to bring the hardness and the force down, and there we go. And let's make the force even less and the brush size bigger. And that should really kind of blur those. There we go. Still got some gray poking out there, Raleigh. And I think I'm ready to merge these layers. I love the blonde eyebrows. So this layer I can do away with. So the reason why I'm ready to merge is I'm done with the alterations to the individual layers, and now I need to do some manipulation to them with their pixels pressed onto the same layer. So this is a destructive step, which means if I go back, I'm going to lose any progress I do. So one thing you can do, I'm not going to do it, but one thing you can do is you can copy or make a duplicate of both of these layers. And that way, if you do mess up, you don't have to undo a million steps. You can just delete the problem layers and then go back to your original ones. But just for the sake of time, I'm going to merge these together. And then what I'd like to do with it is do a little bit of clone stamping in the hair. So command click and then just kind of stretch that out a little bit. And then I want to smudge, kind of smudge here. You can sort of see there's a little bit of a line just to kind of mask the fact that those layers were ever separate. Okay, a little bit more. And now that those layers are merged into one layer, all the pixels, now when I smudge or when I paint over, I'm affecting everything that's in that layer. So, all right. Last but not least, we'll do some fun transformation of Raleigh's head, or Raleigh/Johnny, or Raleigh the punk. Some of what you saw in those images I showed at the beginning, I'm going to play around with some of those effects now, since I didn't really monsterize them that much. So one tool that's really fun for this is the warp transform tool. So with a pretty good sized brush, I'm going to just start to stretch some of his features and just sort of exaggerate some of this stuff. This is kind of like liquefy in Photoshop, sort of the equivalent of that. He's looking pretty bloated. And maybe make his ears bigger. There we go. I can start to really, I can start to really mess with him here. He's maybe had a tough night. He's a little bug-eyed. So now he's looking pretty. He's looking like he's had a CBGB's night. Another thing I'd like to do is add a filter to the top of the head, and because for two reasons. One, I want to distort it a little bit more and show you some filters, and also that perspective discrepancy, I think I can solve that by, I'm just going to select the top of the head because I don't really want to affect the body. And I'm going to feather this selection. Feather. I'm going to feather my selection, which is going to make the edges soft so that it's not such a hard transition at mostly around the mouth where I've got the bottom of the marquee. And you're not going to see that feathering here on the marching ants, but if you look at the selection panel, you'll see that there's a bit of a softer edge there. And now what I'm going to do is go to Filter, and I think it's Artistic. No, it's Distort, and I'm going to Shift. No, not Shift. It was Filter, Distort, Ripple. There we go. Ripple. So That's a bit much on the ripple. So we'll bring that down. And I can change the angle of the ripple and that. See if I can solve it. There we go. So that kind of solves that perspective problem a little bit. Just by rippling his head slightly, it sort of tilts it in the direction that I want to, which is a little bit to the right. All right, so I'm gonna select none, and I'm gonna zoom back out to 100%. And then I'm gonna do one last thing, which is a photo adjustment, and it's going to kind of merge these two layers together a little bit more seamlessly because the colors and the lighting are obviously very different in both photos. One looks like it was taken in natural light or in a very, very, during the daytime, at least indoors, and the other one is in the windowless CBGB's bathroom, and there's no way anyone's in there in the daytime. So I don't think CBGB's exists in the daytime. So, I'm going to use a photo adjustment on the top layer, and so I'm going to go to colors, and here in colors, most of these are really like photo adjustments. These are all things that you would find in a photo adjustment program like Lightroom. So I'm going to colorize that layer, and the default is this crazy teal color. So one way, I'm going to try to match the background. So the one way I can do this, which is by eye, and I can try to find that approximate value, but this is not the best way to do it, although it would certainly, it'd certainly work if I took long enough, but there's a faster way to do that and a more accurate way to do it, and that's to use the color picker tool. So I'm going to grab the color picker tool, and I'm going to go into my background layer, and I'm going to make sure this is set foreground color, and I'm just going to grab kind of a random midtone from, from the background, and then I'm going to double click that foreground color, and I'm going to go to the CMYK sliders, and I'm going to try to remember these numbers, 28, 41, 62, 28, 41, 62, and then I'm going to go to colors, 28, 41, 62, colorize, oops, wrong layer, let's try that again. Ugh. All right, I'm going to be editing this part out. Okay, click here, CMYK, 28, 41, 62. Is that right? What's nice is that I can bring this up while yeah, that's right. 28, 41, 62. And hit OK. Hit OK. So then I've got the right color. Values are matched exactly with the background because I've sampled that sepia tone background, which is staying in that one monochromatic range. And then I'll just increase the brightness and contrast a little bit, and so bring the brightness up. You can do it this way. You can scrub, although it's a little frustrating. It goes really slowly. I do have a split screen view. I can't remember where that is. Here it is. Split view. So I've got the split view, and another nice thing about Gimp is that you can move this split view around so that if it's in a place in your image that's not convenient, you can move it. So let's increase the contrast. Let's do this the smart way. There we go. And yeah, looks good. All right, so then there's my photo adjustment, and I could play around with that a lot more. I could add a curves layer or brightness, an exposure layer, and really get it right. But for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it there. And one last thing, even though I promised the the one last thing was three last one things ago. 3 one last things ago. I'm going to just add a slight blur to the background. Just let's do 1.2. Right, just a little bit of a soft focus to the background, just to because all the values are the same, so that just helps with the depth a little bit. Okay, so that's there we go. Punk Raleigh fingers. There's a lot more I could do to this image, but for an intro, I think that's a pretty good review of some of the basic features and some of the essential tools and techniques and managing workflow and navigating the workspace. So hopefully that gives you some ammo to do your own challenge or to play around with your own projects and get comfortable in Gimp. So the very last thing is that you're going to want to save your image, so save as, and just overwrite what I already had as an XCF file, which is the Gimp format. And then if you want to convert this file to something that other programs can recognize, you can export and just type in the extension that you want to use. So I'm going to use the old JPEG, and I'm going to export. And it's going to ask me what I want for my quality and all this other stuff, and I'm just going to hit export. And now I've got somewhere on my desktop, among my middle-aged mess of items, there it is. Is my JPEG, and my Mac likes to do this to me where it doesn't want to fetch that program. There we go. So here it is, open in preview. So, standard format. So there you go. Gimp Monster Eyes Challenge. Have fun.